Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Read and Reread. I am Angelia, and it is time again for Friday Reads on February 16th. I am back. I'm making a comeback. So, if you were here last Friday, you know that I was making a video last Friday morning and saying, oh, I have escaped catching COVID because Stephen had it, and la 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 la. That was short-lived. I mean, I went from being fine that morning to briefly passing through the valley of uh-oh, and then I was felled. By the end of the day, I was felled, people, and I was sick all week. But now I feel fine. It's gone. I'm better. There's a little lingering cough, but I'm okay. And so I am back happily for Friday Reads. Hopefully your week was better than mine, but things are looking up. TV, I don't even remember. I don't know. It's a blur. We did start watching Schitt's Creek again, and it is just as wonderful as before. And I think it's one of those shows you could just watch it. I mean, you could watch it any number of times forever, and it's always going to be just as funny. So we've only gotten a few episodes in, but really enjoying this rewatch. And there's one episode left of True Detective, the Night Country, and I have no idea how they're going to manage to close out all of the different storylines and threads. I mean, they did explain a couple of things in the penultimate episode, but they've got a lot of work to do. So, but I've really been enjoying that. It's super dark and really good. All right, but on to the reading. Here's the good news. I was able to read during my confinement, and so I did read several books this past week, and I want to talk about them now. The first one was that I finished reading The Blue Book of Nebo by Manon, Steffan. This is a Welsh novel. It's very short, 150 pages. It's post-apocalyptic. I read it for the Feverary section of the Read Goods I mess this up every time. The Read Good Challenge from Ben Reads Good. It's the S on the read coming and going that's throwing me off here. Anyway, I read this. I really liked it a lot. If you really enjoy post-apocalyptic and dystopian fiction, I suggest that you add this to your list, to your repertoire. It's kind of a different take. And the book, it did not remind me of Station 11 at all in the plot or anything, but there was a certain vibe that comes up in Station 11 when they're kind of just reflecting on the way the world is now post-pandemic. And some of that I felt was captured in this book as well. In this particular book, a nuclear event has occurred. And we know this from the people of the story don't really know exactly what happened. It happened somewhere farther away, but they literally, the fallout reaches them. And I don't want to tell too many things because in a book this short, really talking much about the plot is a spoiler in itself. But anyway, that has happened, and it has happened several years in the past, and a woman and her teenage son are living off the land. And they find a little notebook, and they begin to record separately a journal. And they're recording their thoughts, and they've agreed not to read each other's sections of the journal, but they think that unless something happens someday to one of them. And I kind of started wishing halfway through this book that they would cheat and read each other's journals, because it would help them understand some things about each other that they're frustrated by. It would also make them really angry when they saw some of the revelations that each other records in their sections of the journal. But anyway, I thought about that as I read. It is a character book, because that's basically what we get here is Rowena and Dylan's journal entries describing their life. Rowena gets more into her backstory and what happened to lead up to this point. And then Dylan, his memories of what they call the time before the end are pretty murky, because he was only 6 years old when that happened. So most of his identity is in the here and now. Although he is very intrigued, because they're both heavy readers, because there's no really other kinds of entertainment. And, all the books about relationships, especially now that he's become a teenager, and what people do together, and scenes where there's crowds on the streets. And then he's starting to think about girls, but it's such an abstract because there aren't any around. And on the other hand, Rowena is absolutely more content now than she was. She had a pretty tough life in the times before. And so it's just really interesting to read about their everyday life. And it's funny, I was looking at some reviews, and somebody on, I think it was on Goodreads, called it cozy apocalypse. And I thought, well, I mean, it's definitely kind of agrarian. I don't know how cozy it is, but I thought that was an interesting description. But I want to read this one little piece from Rowena's part of the journal that kind of explains, and this gives you a sense of the vibe of the whole book and maybe help you know if you feel like reading it or not. But this is Rowena's reflections on how she feels about life in her current status. Does it sound awful? The end. Losing it all, society collapsing, everything I knew in pieces. I was never so satisfied. It felt like falling to begin with, a lack of help and care and support, plus insecurity about the most basic things, health, food, home. There's no energy left to worry about anything else, and the exhaustion of the physical work we have to do to stay alive means we sleep at night instead of staying awake, worrying about things we cannot change. Things are so simple now and so easy to love. The morning mist like old ghosts at the bottom of the garden. The peal of Dylan's laughter as he reads something funny in one of his books. The flowers that are yet to come and my faith in them even when the weather is at its cruelest. I think about how things were before the end and how it doesn't feel like me in those memories. That girl, silent and afraid of the world. So that is a taste of the style of this book. I enjoyed it very much. If you were only going to read one apocalyptic book, I wouldn't say this one. But if this is a type of fiction that you like, I think you should add it to your list. The next one that I read, I kind of gobbled this one up when I was sick, and I cannot talk about it at this time because it was for the BookTube prize judging. That's The Rachel Incident by Caroline O'Donoghue. I'm going to separately record my thoughts about this book to share in my later vlog, but I did read this last weekend. Hopefully I was not in a fever dream when I was reading it, but I will save my comments for the future on that one, but I did read it. Then, let's see. And then I moved on to Anything is Possible by Elizabeth Strout. I'm rereading the books about Lucy Barton, and after I decided to do that, I found out that there's something new coming out later this year, so that made it even more pertinent. But so I read Lucy Barton last month, and this month I read Anything is Possible. These are linked short stories that take place in Lucy Barton's hometown, Illinois. Like I said, I did read this before, and I remember liking it a lot. My recollection was just, oh, okay, that was good. So I start rereading it, and I was kind of curious because having read through these books the first time when they were released, so with space between them, and my takeaway was that my favorite one is Oh William. And I thought, well, when I reread these, we'll see if it reshuffles, because a lot of people mention this book as being their favorite in the set. And I thought, well, let's see what happens. So I start rereading it, and oh my gosh, I forgot how dark this book was. It's not that the Lucy Barton books are light and breezy. They're actually deceptive because they have a very spare style that could come across as light or breezy, but really there's actually quite a lot of depth and serious topics underneath. But this is definitely a deeper dive into the darkness than My Name is Lucy Barton. And so we weave in and out amongst various people in this town. Some of them actually talk about Lucy Barton in the course of their story. At the time that we are moving about the town, it moves around in time a little bit, but several of them take place on a linear timeline. And Lucy Barton has a book that has come out. So people will mention they saw it in the bookstore, or they will start to read the book or look at the book. So Lucy as a topic does come up, and some people say, "Oh, remember Lucy Barton?" Or she shows up on the TV in an interview during a story. And so, and sometimes she's directly more of the topic than other times. In one story, she's actually there, which is, I don't want to just mention this in passing because it's one of the most compelling stories in the book. It's a devastating story about Lucy going home to visit her sister and brother. And it takes place well past the time of My Name is Lucy Barton, when after her parents have both passed away, and she's on a book tour in Chicago, which is a reasonable day trip drive to this town. And so she goes to visit, and there's just, I mean, the three of them are survivors of abuse and trauma. Their home was unhappy. Their parents were desperately poor, and both were mentally ill and abusive in different ways. And the outcome of the three of them as adults, and the way that they survive, and the way that they relate to each other, and just the touch points and the explosions that come up in this short visit, it's really, really concentrated and intense. And really, that's a theme throughout the whole collection, is people just walking around with a lot of pain and anxiety. There's not a lot of happy people in these stories, even people who kind of have kidded themselves that things are okay, and then something peels off a little bit of their facade, and they start to think about things. And I mean, there's just a lot of troubled people in this town. But it's also about communication and connection in these pivotal moments where somebody might decide to go a different path. Like in a moment where maybe somebody would just tell someone where to get off, they decide instead to extend an olive branch, a moment of grace, and it just kind of changes the direction of things for somebody else. There's a lot of conversations in this book that start out where you think it's going one way, and then there is a sharp right turn. And so it's not without hope, but whoo, it is pretty intense. There's some deep machinations going on in these stories. And as far as a group of collected stories, it's really strong. There's one or two that I think are not as strong as the others, but there's several in here that I don't know how they would do as standalones, but they are just short fiction masterpieces. So I was really glad to reread Anything is Possible by Elizabeth Strout. I also am almost finished with Black AF History by Michael Harriot. This has been my official nonfiction selection for February. Don't know if I'll fit any more nonfiction in February because it's a short month and time is already starting to dwindle. But this has been really a rewarding read. I've talked about it for the past few weeks, so you know that I'm really enjoying it. But it is both incredibly informative and funny. You're going to find out about so many people that you either never heard of, or you've heard of them in passing, or you thought you knew a lot about them, but you didn't get, you missed out on some aspects of the story. Very, very good book. I want to read to you just a teeny little passage that kind of sums up what this whole book is really about. And this is not one of the funny parts, but there is a lot of humor in this book. But this one, if you're wondering whether this is a book for you, this is what this book is actually about. Harriet's talking about the civil rights movement at this point, but it really applies to the whole book as a look at American history. If we believed the whitewashed, safe-for-work version of the civil rights struggle, we would believe that a lone white man killed Emmett Till, jolting black people out of a dreamlike state to suddenly realize that we didn't have all the rights afforded to us by the U.S. Constitution. In response, Martin Luther King convinced everyone to hold hands and march peacefully until he could remember his dream. When he told the world about it at the March on Washington, America suddenly saw the error of its ways and handed black people their humanity, and everyone lived happily ever after. That's the Cliff Notes version of the civil rights struggle that exists in our collective whitewashed memory, and it is sold in social studies classes across America. If you want to hear more about the things that got left out of your social studies class, I highly recommend Black AF History by Michael Harriot. I am enjoying it a lot. I think there's only a couple of chapters left, but I am so glad that I found this book at the library when I was actually looking for something else, because this really fit the bill for me this month. The other book that I'm reading right now is The Good Lord Bird by James McBride. And this is a book that I've been meaning to read for several years. When it first came out, I thought it sounded good, and I had not read anything by James McBride at that point. And then I went on to love Deacon King Kong, and then I loved The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store, and still had not read The Good Lord Bird. So finally I am making amends. I'm about halfway through, and surprise, surprise, it's really good. It's about a young boy. His name's actually Henry, but through an event at the very beginning of the story that's kind of hard to explain how this happens, but he ends up running off with John Brown, the abolitionist, who thinks that he is a little girl, and renames Henry Onion. At first Henry makes an attempt to explain that John Brown has made a mistake and he's not actually a girl, but then he decides to just kind of run with it, because he discovers that there are a few advantages to everybody thinking that he is actually a girl. So he's a kid about 12 years old who's now running with John Brown and all of his assorted sons, and a kind of a changing kaleidoscope of additional people that are galloping through the state of Kansas. He's trying to stage a variety of raids and upsets in his quest to free the states from slavery. The character of John Brown is really wild and eccentric in this book, but apparently he was so in real life as well. So it was one of those books where you know it's based on a historical character. And sometimes I have kind of funny problems with that, like if they take too many liberties. So I started to read it, and then I thought, is he turning this into a tall tale? Like, does he really have that many sons and all this? So then I had to look up some biographical information and refresh my memory of John Brown, and I was like, well, actually, it doesn't actually sound that exaggerated. And in typical McBride fashion, we have somehow managed to have racism, violence, and humor coexisting, and the character of Henry / Onion is really engaging, and he's a kid who has lived as an enslaved person during his brief 12 years, but he has learned a lot of street smart sort of skills for surviving in this world, how to listen as an enslaved person and as a kid, how to be a really great listener and gather lots of intel so that he can figure out the best way to play different situations and what's going to work best for him. And he's at the beginning of the story as a kid, he's not that concerned with the whole political world of the adults and the conflicts and the free staters and the rebels and all this stuff. He's kind of like, I just want to go back home and do what I was doing, and I don't really care about all of this war and this uprising and all this kind of stuff. But as he is starting to get a little older, mature, and the story progresses, he's beginning to, in the Huck Finn style, rethink the life he has grown up with and the reality that he has experienced versus the possibilities of the world. So I'm in the middle of the story right now, really enjoying it, and it's an adventure too. I don't know what's going to happen next. There's always danger and tension going on in every part of the story, and it's a good ride. So I'm going to continue, and I'll let you know my thoughts next week after I have finished. I'm actually not sure what's coming up next. I have a couple of books left from my February TBR that I haven't gotten to yet, and there is another buddy read coming up next week. And anyway, so I need to look at my collection of remainders and see whether or not when I have time to continue reading. I also have 2 more books to read for the BookTube prize that have now come in, so I can get started on those as well. So this weekend I'm just going to enjoy finishing Black AF History and The Good Lord Bird, and then I will see what's in store for me. So let me know what you have read this week that has been really wonderful, or a giant dud, whatever you want to tell me about, or what you are planning to read this weekend. I want to hear all about it. I will be back on Tuesday. Have a great weekend, and I will see you soon. Bye-bye.